little bit about myself is I currently own and operate a large-scale cannabis company. We cultivate, we distribute B2B, B2C, a lot of marijuana every year, and been doing it now for 7 years. Founded a company right here in Arizona, actually right next to the airport. Founded the company there, and that's kind of where I sit currently. I'll go more in depth into that later, but I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My parents were always entrepreneurs, so it seemed normal, right, to be an entrepreneur, to have conversations with your dad where he's saying, this week we're not going out to eat. This week we are going out to eat. Oh, we did really well this week, right? It's interesting to see that ride, right? And once you own and operate your own business, you kind of understand, right? There's ebb and flows. Sometimes things are going great. Sometimes things are going a little slow, and sometimes you're stressed out and you don't know if you're going to make it, and then you end up making it and you learn from it, right? And so growing up, I thought that was normal, and I've just realized in the last 5 years that that's not super normal. I think entrepreneurship is actually for people who are a little less normal than you'd think. It's people who are willing to take risks, who are willing to kind of take a leap of faith and see where it goes. And so, normal growing up, except for that, right? And my dad, he owned a Baskin Robbins, about 9 stores in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so I got to see him, right, sell ice cream and what it takes to own a business and operate a business. And when I was 13, he had always done the concessions. He always did the International Balloon Fiesta, the state fair, and stuff like that. And he had come to me and said, "Hey, you interested in making cotton candy for me? Because I want to sell cotton candy at the fair and the Balloon Fiesta." I was 13, and I had always worked for him from the time I was probably 5, 6 years old. I was always scooping ice cream, and by the time I was 13, I was actually getting paid to do it, right? And so I was like, yeah, I'll make the cotton candy. Well, quickly that first year, the other vendors at the state fair, they took note rather quickly, and they said, "Hey, will you make me some cotton candy?" So me, Mr. Young Entrepreneur, went back to my pops and I said, "Hey, they want me to make cotton candy for them, and I can sell it to them for $1. They're willing to pay $1 per bag, and I can make it for 10 cents." And he's like, "Really?" Kind of didn't really know. He's like, "Yeah, go for it." I'm like, "So I'm going to buy," I told him like very clear, "I'm going to buy the bags, I'm going to buy the sugar, I'm going to do the work, right? And I want to see how it goes." So that first state fair, I made $2,000 in 2 weeks, right? And I remember going back to my pops. I worked my ass off that whole first 2 weeks. I went back to my pops at the end of it, and I was beat. I worked for him selling ice cream that whole week, and then made cotton candy at night. And so I went back to my dad, and I'm like, "Man, I made $2,000. Like, I feel like that's pretty good." And he's like, "What?" Like, "Wow, like you did pretty good. What are you gonna do?" I said, "Well, I think I'm gonna try my luck at the Balloon Fiesta." It was a week after, International Balloon Fiesta. If you've never been, it's awesome. It's totally worth checking out. Probably one of the only reasons why you'd want to go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, but that's in October. And I did it again. I did another $2,000 in that 2 weeks. And so it was quickly $4,000 as a 13-year-old. I was like, "Man, then maybe there's something here," and I thought about it for a little bit. And I ended up kind of devoting my childhood life, teenage life to it, right? And so I was 13 doing that. And by the time I was 16, I had hired all my buddies, in and out. They're all helping me make. I had scaled it up from that $4,000 in that month to doing about $150,000 cash that year that I turned 16. And the margins were crazy. I wasn't paying taxes, right? I was just wholesale manufacturing cotton candy. It was crazy, right? And so I was 16 years old, and I learned a lot of lessons. I learned how to mix business and family. I learned how to manage other people. I learned how to be involved in a supply chain and what the supply chain meant for me. I didn't learn how to pay taxes, right? And so it was all cash.
Still owes taxes on the cotton candy.
It's just crazy to think about, right? And I thought it was normal. It seemed normal, and it was a lot of sugar, a lot of hard work. I was doing 100% of the manual labor with help, right? And it was daily, my hands having to make that cotton candy and kettle corn. Is what I added on when I was turned 16. And so I carried that out all through high school, again, thought it was normal, was just stacking cash in a safe, and completely thought it was normal. And by the time I was 18, right, I was getting excited, and I started to spend a little bit of money, but was always very, very frugal. And then I went into college, and I went into college at the University of New Mexico. And I had gotten a little bit discouraged. You know, I was like, man, I don't know about this. Being an entrepreneur, I think I want to get a degree. I think I want to go elsewhere. And it led me to a few different paths. And so, you know, but when I was in college, I got focused on getting a business degree, finance degree, learned a lot about numbers, how to manage capital, and, you know, but tried to apply that to my business at the time. And so at that time, I ended up getting a contract with the University of New Mexico football and basketball stadium and a couple other stadiums in Albuquerque. And that story is kind of crazy. I told you that one. I'll elaborate on that one because I like that one. But, you know, long story short is I was a subcontractor selling cotton candy and kettle corn there from the time I was like 14, 15 to now 21. You know, I was a college student going to that college, and I had always sold concessions there. But it was always me manufacturing the cotton candy and kettle corn. And when I was 21, I wanted to expand it. And so then I ended up opening up like the retail stores in the stadiums where I was selling like hot dogs, the cotton candy, the kettle corn, all of that. And the margins were great. And the university had never sold alcohol ever in the history of any of their stadiums. And that year they signed a contract, decided to, and the board of directors for the university decided they're going to sell alcohol. So I went to them and I asked if I could get the alcohol contract, and they laughed, you know, literally laughed in my face. They're like, you think we're going to allow a 21-year-old to sell alcohol to 21-year-olds? Like, you're crazy, right? And I kept pushing. I'm like, man, I've been the longest tenured contractor you've had here, right? I've been here for like 8 years now, you know, 7 years. Like, I think I deserve it. And they kept pushing me off. I ended up doing presentation after presentation just to get no's. And that's when I started to get a little bit discouraged. I'm like, man, I'm glad I'm getting a degree because I don't see this really panning out, you know. And ultimately, after pushing, I think I met with them 5 or 6 times, you know, after the last time. They said, you know what, if you can get insurance to sell alcohol at the stadium, then we'll allow you to sell the alcohol. And so I beat the streets. I went and got denied like 13 times to even get the insurance, and I was discouraged again. I was like, fuck, man, I might be done. You know, and so
because it's hard to get insurance
to get any type of liability insurance, much less to serve alcohol, it blew my mind. But yeah, it was very tough. Yeah. And so I got denied after denied so many times that I didn't know what to do. I ended up calling my dad, right? And I always felt kind of weird, you know, asking my dad for help, but he was always so helpful, thank God. And I said, man, I don't know what to do, but, you know, your name is Anthony Sullins. My name's Anthony Sullins. What's your thoughts on getting the insurance for me, and I'll present this to the board? And he was like, sure. You know, he got it the first time. I ended up going to the board and saying, here's the insurance, and their face was just crumbled in front of me of like, fuck, like, you got the insurance.
So they didn't know it was your dad?
No, they had no idea. I can't believe I did that, looking back.
Like dram shop, like liquor liability laws in New Mexico? Like,
dram shop? No.
Yeah.
No, they didn't.
Can you get sued if somebody gets fucked up and does something stupid, basically?
Yes, but what I found out with that is that I was not only covered under my insurance, I was also covered under the university's insurance.
Nice.
You know, and so they ended up kind of freaking out on me and said, all right, we'll give it to you. You know, I was fighting against some of the largest alcohol distributors in the state, and a couple larger ones in the nation, right? And they actually gave it to me, right? And I was psyched. Felt like we earned it that first year. I was 21 years old, going to school. We ended up crushing it. And we sold so much alcohol at the university. It was awesome, right?
People have blast.
You know, so I was the guy selling your $20 beers, you know, $20 beers, and people hated me but loved me, right? Because I had an in with all the college students, and at the same time, you know, we were serving alcohol, so we were throwing crazy parties there at the stadiums. Like, it was awesome, and then it got tough. You know, that first year I used to hire temp employees. I would pull in about 75 to 150 at a time just for the game. So it'd be in and out. I'd be temp employees. We'd hold on to maybe 15% of them the next week, and every time they were new. So we would do 2 hours worth of training, and then we would send them off, and we would sell alcohol. You know, it was difficult, and you know, I had some instances that that I thought were going to set me back extremely. One of them, which I always love talking about, is I had a temp employee who was a veteran using a cane, right? And he's at the cash register selling alcohol, and the line is, forever down the block just to buy your $20 beers. And he ended up getting pissed off and cracked a tall boy over the customer's head. And so I'm at the other side of the stadium working with staff members, and I get a call like, hey, we need you now, blah, 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 just punched one of the customers. I'm like, what? So I run over there, the paramedics are there, the cops are there, and it ended up turning into a big thing. Thank God it didn't turn into anything worse, but long story short is, I ended up having to go in front of the board and explain how things happen, why things happen, so it's not gonna happen again. And that one was very defeating, very scary. I thought I was done. And so I like I said, I was questioning being an entrepreneur, and it's just, those setbacks, they're bound to happen, but some of them are scarier than others. And so I ended up going and applying at Intel to be on their finance team, and got hired on and got to do a short stint there and learn corporate finance. I got some advice from my dad that he told me. He was like, you should do both, right? Run your business and see what the corporate world is like and see how it goes. And so that's what I did, and I'm glad I did. I learned a lot, right? And I was on the side of, well, maybe I don't need this business anymore. I had stacked a lot of cash, and I thought that I would just sit on it, invest on it. Like, why double down? Why, right? And so I was working at Intel, and within the first 3 months, very quickly, it was a difficult situation. I didn't fit the mold. I was learning a lot, but was concerned. I'm like, why am I not really gelling that well? All those internal insecurities that you get when you face hardship. And I had a big presentation that summer that I was presenting to my boss's boss. And it was about, if I can remember correctly, it was a new technology called like phototronics or something like that. I can't believe I can't remember, but that Intel was just getting ready to launch, and they had tasked me with doing the revenue models for all the tools that were going to be used for that launch of this new product. And so I did this presentation, and I started to go in depth about, this is how it's going to affect the marketing side. This is what we can do on marketing, right? On operations, the way your tools are going to work. Now we can change it here, and you're going to save money here. And I went in depth in all these different departments, and I got pulled out of this big presentation I had. And my boss tells me, AJ, every time you present to us, you keep bringing up these other departments. How can it affect here? How can it affect here? We need you to solely just give us the model. Just tell us the numbers. That's it. That's what your job is. We don't want to hear anything else. You're wasting our time.
Be an employee.
Yeah. And it was just so demoralizing. I was crushed, right? I thought I was bringing so much value and that I was helping, and it was the opposite, right? And, I walked out of there like, shit, I'm glad I kept my business open, and so ultimately I was a little discouraged, and I continued to work for Intel at that time, but I knew that, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Albuquerque, New Mexico, but there's not a lot of young professionals there. It's a very old school city, it's mostly real estate, and there's a big ceiling for new businesses, young entrepreneurs. It's a cap there. There's not much that you can do, and I thought that I had hit a cap with my own business. I had gotten contracts with all the larger stadiums. I had accomplished the goals I wanted to accomplish, and I kind of self-reflection of, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? Because this is probably all I could do. Pivoting here in Albuquerque is not going to work. Well, that year, medical cannabis had just gotten passed in New Mexico, and so I had always been a weed smoker. From the time I was probably 10, 11, 12, always smoke. I don't know why, I just did. And my parents, and my parents, they left me alone because I had good grades, and I was helping pay my mom's mortgage, right? I was paying her mortgage. They didn't care, right? They're like, hey, if you're going to work your ass off like you're doing, smoke weed, who cares? Don't get in trouble. And so I ended up seeing that the medical marijuana got passed, and I was like, man, I'd really like to make a play in there, but I was scared to touch the plant. I was scared to sell weed, right? I never really sold weed. I always tried to avoid it because I didn't want to ruin what I had created with the cotton candy business. You know, we were doing about 150, 170 grand a year, all the way up until that time when we started selling alcohol, and I didn't want to ruin it. And so I was like, man, I'm going to create a business plan. It's going to be completely centered around cannabis, but packaging for cannabis. You know, I'm going to avoid this step. And you know, looking back, the way our paths are aligned is just insane. And so that year I created a business plan. I actually pitched it to one of my business professors, and the professor looked at me and was like, dude, I really think you should do this. I was like, I don't know. Like, I was kind of just doing this for the class. It was an entrepreneurial class. And he's like, no, I really, really think you should just give it a shot. You know, let's go to lunch. So I ended up going to lunch, and he encouraged me a lot and was like, you know, I know your other business. I think it's worth it, right? And I think the lesson learned there is to always get feedback from mentors on all decisions. You know, it's so helpful just a conversation like this and just to bounce it off of and get some perspective from someone else. But
how big was the alcohol business? Like what was kind of the annual revenues when you had all these alcohol?
Sure, we were doing just under $2 million a year in gross, and
That's a pretty big business.
it was very big, and it felt huge at the time, right? It felt like, I don't know if I could get bigger than this, right? And there's a lot of help that I had from especially my dad. There was a lot of help, and so I created that business plan, and I was thinking about doing that in New Mexico. Well, that summer, it was my sister's wedding, and I went to the wedding, had a great time. My uncle was there, who I wasn't ever really that close with. He was an electrical contractor, also an entrepreneur. And he was at the wedding, and he was actually moving to Chandler, Arizona that next day, okay? And so I get a call at like 8 a.m. that next day, and he calls me and he says, hey, your aunt, his sister, not his wife, your aunt was supposed to help me move all my stuff to Chandler, Arizona, but her house burned down last night. I was like, oh shit, you know, I had no idea. He said, is there any way you can help me drive all my stuff to Arizona? So during that time, I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. You know, he puts me in an 18-wheeler driving down, what's that mountain on the Payson route? That's literally like this, you know, driving a freaking semi-truck.
Coming down 87.
Yep.
It's so sketchy.
It's so sketchy. And
I drove in the rain. I was like, I don't know.
yeah, so sketchy. And driving that truck too, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Yeah, he had a full semi-truck. And I get there at 8 a.m. and he says, hey, you drive your concessions trailer. You think you could drive this? I'm like, dude, I don't know. And he's small. He's probably like 5'2". He's like, well, I sure as hell can't drive it. I'm like, who were you thinking was going to drive this? Aunt Christy? You know, I'm like, what?
I feel like there's a loose relationship with the law in your life.
Just a little bit.
Don't drive this thing.
To take risks, yeah. Exactly. And so I ended up on that trip. We got to Chandler, and I ended up saying like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a new business. What do you think? And I handed it to him, and he laughed so hard in my face. And he's like, well, do you know what I'm moving out here for? And I said, I assumed electrical contracting. What else, you know? And he said, well, yes, but I'm doing it for some large cannabis facilities, cultivations that I'm doing the electrical for. And I was like, oh shit, really? You know, that's very interesting. Let's talk more. And so he gave me some pointers on the business plan. Was like, hey, this is a real need, you know.
The business plan still the packaging.
Packaging, yeah. And he's like, you know, it's a real need. You know, I think you should explore it more. And so that next week, I'm working at Intel, and they pull me aside and they say, we are condensing your team. You're the low man on the totem pole, and you either have the option to move to Chandler, Arizona, or you're going to lose your job. You know, and I'm like, I immediately told them no. I'm like, not interested in moving to Chandler. You know, that's not in my goals. I have my business here, right? My concessions business, not planning on leaving. And they said, well, just think about it for a little bit, you know, and you have 6 months, right? Just think about it. I think it'd be great. We'll fly you down there, go check it out. Let us know what you think. And so that was 1 week later. And then like 30 days later, I get a call from my uncle, and he says, you know, I've been thinking about your business plan a lot. What would you think about us just partnering up and doing our own cultivation? I can do the construction, the build out, you do the operations, it could work great. Immediately said no. Like, no, not interested. Staying here in Albuquerque. I got my concessions business, it's doing great, and I'm leaving Intel, right? And he said, well, you know, just talk to a young entrepreneur just like you. Just talk to him. He's a good friend. His name is Anthony. and he's in the cannabis industry and he loves it, right? Give him a call. So I gave him a call. He was in Oregon at the time, and we hit it off immediately. You know, I sent him my business plan and he loved it. He thought it was a great idea. Was giving me all these pointers, how the industry works. He was in Arizona and Oregon, California, just doing all these different businesses in the cannabis industry. I was like, man, this is interesting. You know, a couple weeks later, I get a call from my uncle and Anthony, and they said, hey, we've thought about this a lot and we really want to partner up, us three. Let's raise capital, let's build a cultivation, we could do it all ourselves, what do you think? And I ended up saying yes. You know, I'm like, okay, great. Went back to Intel and said, yes, I'll move to Chandler, you know, and so decided to, to transfer over to Chandler for Intel. They paid for my move, it was awesome, you know, and I asked them for 4 months. I said, can you please give me 4 months to start my concessions business out there, which was really going to be my cannabis business. And so during that 4 months, us three, we beat the streets. We raised just under $4 million in capital to build out what we needed to. We all put our money in the pot to the tune of another $2 million, right? We all said, here you go.
Did you just give up the concessions business, or did you have somebody try to run it?
No, you know what I did is I actually sold 50% of it to my dad. He was like, this is a great business, I'll buy it. And I ended up selling the business to him, and he ran it all the way to last year. COVID shut us down, so we were 50-50 to last year. But I remember telling him, and you and I kind of hit it off on this story. I remember telling him that I wanted to go into the cannabis industry, and he thought I was out of my mind. Out of my mind. He was like, dude, you have this cushy job at Intel, you're making 6 figures, they're paying you to golf every afternoon. Like, why would you want to leave this? Stay there for 20 years. You know, you're going to love it. Forget about the business. Like, you just stay there and get your retirement, right? And I was like, Dad, are you kidding me? Like, you know, I've grown up with you as an entrepreneur my whole life. You think I don't fit the mold, you know, I can't do it. And he just thought I was out of my mind, right? And so for 4 months before I actually started working at Intel, like I said, we raised the capital, we started to build out, and things were actually going well. It was working. We raised the capital easier than I thought. And we did it through a unit structure, which I'm assuming we're talking about capital raises later. And so I'd love to dive into kind of the structure that we used and how it worked from that standpoint. I know you talked about raising capital as well. And so we raised the money, we built it out, and things were going well. So I ended up calling Intel and saying, unfortunately, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not going to take the job, right? And my boss was pissed, you know, like, how could you? We moved you out there, we paid for everything, we made it so great for you, I put you on the best team, you know, all this and that. And I remember that moment of just pure fear. You know, you guys with your businesses, I'm sure you felt the same. There's times where it's like, fuck, am I doing the right thing? Should I be leaving this cushy job where I know I can stay here for 20 years? Like, is this the right thing to do? And risked it. You know, I bought a 5th wheel trailer and put it outside of the business when we were doing construction and startup, and I stayed inside of there and lived on site. You know, we ended up that first year did $3 million in revenue, and I thought it was awesome. You know, and I thought it was working. The next year 7, next year 9, next year 10, and last year up to 25, and just constantly reinvesting, building a team, sharing the vision, and kind of betting on ourselves, you know, and really betting on ourselves. And now I can say I don't regret leaving Intel, but at the time, you know, I definitely did. And now I can say I don't regret leaving the concessions business and how that shaped out to be, but you know, then I didn't, right? And so sometimes it's those scary things, and I really want the lesson to be learned is, you know, take the step, man. You only live once, right? And for some of the group that's kind of thinking about scalability and expansion and how to hit that next step, I think that's the moral of the story is, you know, work with your mentors and get to that next step, force it, you know, and you're going to be scared. You're going to have nights where you're worried that you're going to make it, the finances won't be there, and I think that's just sometimes part of the gig, you know, and especially when you're scaling. And so I have a lot of experience scaling a company, you know, from $1 million to, or 100,000, or even $10 to a couple $1 million, and then $3 million or $25 million, and our potential is now $50 million this year and next year, and hopefully in 2023 will be potential for an exit. And so we've had valuations around the $125 million mark that we've denied, and I was telling you about that earlier. And that's another one of those moments where it was scary, and I regret it today. I don't know if I'll regret it later. It's really hard to turn. What's that?
Just the latest one. Like they've worked out for you fast.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's the latest fear, right? And so I think my goal now is to expand. We're currently doing construction in New Mexico and Illinois, setting up retail shops, setting up cultivations, and my current goal is to get those operating, cash flowing, high net cash flows, and hopefully a good exit. I think it's ran its course, and it's probably about time to start looking for the next step, the next scary step.
Man, hold on. Give it up for AJ, man.
Thanks. Appreciate that.